Going through chapter 9 was probably one of your easiest exercises here, not the actual chapter. That one is a little bit of a bear to do, but exercise 9 is pretty easy. And what we're looking at here in exercise 9 is something called quintiles. And this is all based on statistical percentages here, concerning the amount that you divide by out of 100. So typically, when I've taken stats class in the past, they usually refer to them either as quartiles or quintiles, which is just a nice way of saying, fourths or fifths of 100. So a quintile in this case would be 20% out of 100. So if you look in your book, Exercise 9, page 108, they talk about your high quintiles and low quintiles. And these are all data points of where a person would fit within these particular quintiles. So they look at the percentages and they look at data points to see where they would fall within these 5 preconditioned categories here. So the person who's doing the research would divide these 5 categories and turn them into quintiles. So this is just kind of an instance where you would use this. And again, really, this is just reading through the data interpretation. So I don't even have to make an Excel spreadsheet. I will for chapter 10. In fact, that one's a little bit strenuous in terms of trying to create it, but it's not too bad. But show you for chapter 9, first and foremost, going through some of this information here, you'll see that, once again, we go through your quintiles, and you have already had some experience in terms of vertical percentages and horizontal percentage problems, the index numbers, as well as the measured population, or in this case, it would be kind of the sample within the population. And then with your quintiles in terms of light and heavy, and everything in between. Again, these are predetermined by the researcher who's coming up with your quintiles. So whether it's a heavy user or a light user. I mean, you can do this as just essentially as dividing them up into, twos to say at a certain median or mean, there's a heavy user versus light users. I typically use median in this kind of problems if I'm dividing them. But again, it's just how you want to interpret this. So, like I said, they are looking specifically in terms of things like your media outlet and, again, where they are within the quintile percentages here. And so in this case, they're talking about frequent flyer programs. And in this case, they talk, for question number 1, they talk about the frequent flyer programs that are reported in newspaper quintile number 5. So these are your light users. So we're looking over here in this case, and we notice that our sample population for members here is pretty easy. We're just reading this. In fact, this answers questions 1 and 2 just by looking at this little area right here. You can see through the answers here. Quintile and light, there are 4,688. Again, this is the 1,000s here. So you would multiply it by 1,000 would actually get you your actual number. But this is the number you're looking for. And then for number 2, they talk about what proportion of percentage looks up these newspaper quintile readers. And so you can calculate this yourself. It's not that hard to do. And I'll just show you real quick of how that's done. Again, we can see that it makes up 12.89%. And we can do this in terms of looking at our sample versus the overall. Now, granted, they say just add these up. And you can get your information to say, once again, sample over population equals, and times 100 equals your vertical percentages here. So again, pretty easy to determine kind of the math that we do at Media Flight Plan. It just really is not that complicated in terms of what you're doing here. So that's number 2. Number 3, in this case, looks in the director if you're working on Motorola phone business and you need an average magazines for your target audience. You're looking through the frequent flyer members, and after evaluating Exhibit 2, which is the name of the data sheet, what conclusion would you draw about the readers of the magazine, about magazine readership? Report index numbers. So let's go back over to the quintiles over here in terms of magazines over here. So this is our column we're working with here. And we're looking through index numbers. So we notice that magazine users are pretty high in terms of their index numbers with high percentage users. So that's a really good medium to potentially use here. So you got 122 and 120. So this is around, for the heaviest percentage, it's 24.48% within this particular area right here. And that's a good number to look at. Because again, as we're looking at some of these lower users, you can determine that they're not really high in terms of the share within the heavy user, or just the users in general. But where the percentage lies is within your heavy users. So that's really good. So basic math would tell you that using magazines in this case would be a good place to look at. I'll show you here. Yeah, 24.48%. And again, 122 and 120. So this is probably a good place to look at. For number 4, talks about index numbers of frequent flyers at the heaviest magazine user quintile calculated. And it says, show your math here. Okay, so this one is just a hair bit tricky, but it's not too bad. It basically says, how can you calculate this index number here for 122? And the interesting thing for this is we can perceive this based on what's called expected versus observed. These are basically chi-squares. So if you're not familiar with chi-squares, this is just the comparison about what we observed versus what we expected to see. In this particular case, chi-squares can mean a lot of things. However, in this case, we're starting to see that it is above the percentage as to what we've expected. So this is how you're getting a lot of your index numbers in the first place. So what you can do is multiply your percentage at 24.48, or excuse me, divide it, 24.48, and divide it by what we would consider a normal quintile, which is 20. So 20%. So we know that because quintile is 5. 5 into 100, in this case you would get 20 per. So what you would do is you would divide 24.48 divided by 20 times 100, and this would get you your number at 122. So again, pay attention if you're looking at quintiles or quartiles, because again, a quintile would be 20%, whereas a quartile would be 25% in this case. And actually, let's say this was quartile, heaviest users would not have nearly the same amount because it would be less than 100. However, it would fluctuate. This number would fluctuate if it was in the quartiles as well. So especially if you look at the second number being here at 120 and being 24.02 of the market. We could calculate that, but for the sake of time, we won't do that for right now. So the next question is they look in terms of highlighting index numbers across all 5 media for frequent flyers within the target. So let's go back up here. And we are looking on index numbers from high to low. So I'm just looking at my numbers here. Sorry about that, everybody. So we're looking at all of our media users within our heaviest percent here. And we can notice here that internet is at 176 to start off with, newspaper at 148, and you just go down the line. I'm being texted right now. Sorry about that. So within your heaviest users here, internet is probably going to be your best for this particular area, followed by newspaper, outdoor, magazine, and television. We'll get into television here in 1 second. Actually, that's what I'm going to be talking about now. So relatively speaking, which is used the least by frequent flyers? Okay, this one is a little bit, these next two are a little bit complicated in terms of trying to figure out, just because it's kind of reverse logic as to what I've been telling you, but there's a reason for it. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you that they say television here. And you'll notice that if you're looking at these two marks here, they're high index numbers. So you might sit there and say, it should be internet, right? So if we're looking at these particular areas, it should be internet because of these low percentages and index numbers that are coming out of it. But here's where it gets a little tricky, and here's where the different matters. And this is more or less explained in the last problem, problem number 7, is that when you're looking at the high users for TV, you've got 57, 83, and it only gets above 100 at quintile number 3. These are your moderate television users. So why does this matter? And why is it that in this particular case we're dealing at the bottom 2 quintiles here, and it's the least by frequent flyers? Because you could say that doesn't make any sense. These are the highest of everything we're looking at here. And the reason that we're looking at this in such a way is because we're saying that for the people who watch television, they're going to be the least likely to be in your market based on usage alone. So in this case, 119 and 125 are great numbers, but they're only used within a very small population within the quintiles. So I hope that makes sense to everybody, and this will show you a little bit more of what that means. So number 7 kind of looks at this in terms of saying within exercise 7, and talking about these high index numbers, it says a medium is not used heavily, so specific TV shows may still be good. So that's what we're kind of interpreting with these particular areas here, is that although heavy users don't really view it that much, and this is why this is so important to look at, it might be that we have to dive a little bit deeper into this one in particular. These would be what were called like post hoc tests. And what a post hoc test basically indicates is that we've got a lot of variables that we're dealing with here, and we've got to figure out which ones are causing this significant difference. And so it may not be that a very, very popular TV show is going to hit these high index numbers. It may be a very low TV show is in this case. And let's look back in terms of talking about like Motorola, for instance. You know, maybe they're in a spot where people typically watch television programs. Like, you got to think of who your target demographic might be in this case. And so again, these are all variables to determine here. It's not that difficult to interpret everything that's going on here because we're just reading. However, it is about the interpretation on this one. So again, not too hard to figure out, but they are important in this case. Okay, so that is Media Flight Plan Exercise 9. Let's look at 10 real quick. So 10 was a little bit more tedious here because 10 wanted us to take all this information from Exhibit 1, as we can see right here, and put them into 3 separate Excel sheets, which can be a little complicated, especially if you're doing the math on all this. This would take a lot of time. This didn't take me more than about 10-15 minutes to complete. And I only say this because this is, again, the wonders of Excel and making this a little easier. This is my final sheet here. It's a mess. And if you're not used to Excel, you might not know exactly what is going on here. So I'm going to make this a little easy by adding another sheet here. So I've got all this information copied over from Exhibit 1. And so we're going to look for biggest spenders here in this case. So I'm going to write in a total here and figure this out to start off with. So we will do our normal sum function. Again, this is all par for the core of what we've been doing so far. I hope some of y'all have been trying this because, again, this will make your life so much easier. So we see the spending for all these companies here, and I'm going to go ahead. Well, you know what? I'm not going to do that just yet. Actually, I will. Sorry, I'm not being consistent here, so I'm going to do sum for not only the share of voice, but also the totals within this information right here. And I'll go ahead and throw that in there. Okay, so this is what we're looking for both totals on both sides. Now, they first ask, well, you know what, let's let's do what we normally do and check our work. So I'm going to look at basic spending here, and it looks like I'm pretty much on track with everything here. Okay, good. So yeah, all my numbers line up with Media Flight Plan. That's what we want, right? Okay, so the first thing they mention is which of the 5 copier brands is the biggest media spender? So who's spending the most money in this case? And you can pretty much determine just based on looking at where the numbers are lined up that Canon over here is our big media spender here. Whereas, look, so that's our first question here. So we notice this in terms of $14 million in spending, so it's quite a bit of a budget here in this case. Excuse me, so sorry. The next question they ask is which brand spent the most... Goodness gracious, so sorry. Spent the most dollars in cable television. I think I'm done sneezing. And in this case, we can just basically look into the data that we've accumulated here, and we notice that Rico, you can correct me in the comments of how this is being pronounced. I'm sure I'm butchering it, but this is going to be the person the organization that's spending the most money here. Then it says which spend the most on network TV. And this one's a little trickier to look at, but again, basic math will just tell you that Canon is still spending the most in network TV at around $5 million. So again, Rico at almost $1.5 million, and then almost $5 million for Canon for questions 3 and 4. So that's the easy part. The more complicated part here is we're going to look at our media mix. And there's a few ways we could do it. I'm going to do this the easy Excel way, which is take all this information aside from the totals. That's really important. And I'm going to drag it lower down here in my sheet. And I'm going to delete all the variables. Pardon my keyboard here. We're going to start from scratch a little bit here. So remember what I said about calculating this kind of information. We're looking for percentages here. And so we can do an equals. I always do that. Equals your magazine over your total spending here. So in this case, it is 50%. I'm going to go ahead and check my work here. Yep. Okay. Just making sure I'm starting correctly. Now, ideally, what we would do in this case is we would multiply it by 100 as well. So we'll have the sample of magazine spend over the total spent and then multiply it by 100. And you get a nice clean percentage here of 50.5% in this particular case. But remember, normally we would just do something like this, but what it's telling us again, and I've mentioned this in several videos here, is that it's calculating off a value that doesn't exist. So what I'm going to do is just do it the easy way and just copy all this information. So what I did was I just wrote down this information again and just dragged it across the board. So I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about here. So if I were to type in 37122.5 here, it's not attached to anything. Like I'm just typing in a value. I can drag that over in this way, and I'll do it again in terms of talking about share of voice in this case. So again, not too difficult. So I'm going to delete this one for now. Start over. And so we've got our share here. And I can drag this down. See how easy this is? Make your life so much simpler. I haven't had to do any math except for just a little bit. And again, I have all my percentages here. And let's check our work. The easy way to check your work in this particular case is to do a sum. of all these numbers right here, and your parentheses, and it should equal 100. And if I did everything correctly, all of them should equal 100, and they did. And much like in science, I want to make sure we label everything, because I don't do that nearly enough as I should. Okay, so that's number 6, or number 5, excuse me. So again, make this a little simple on yourself here, and just be able to take this information over here and work through your percentages here, just based on this basic math that we're doing. And I'm going to show you how to do it again here. So the next thing they ask in exercise, or example number 6, is share voice. So in this case, I'm going to take this information right here with me. Everything that I copied over, paste it right here. And I'm going to do this one more time. Take all my information, except for my totals. I'm going to paste it lower. So we've got mix and share of voice, or SOV for short. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and say pardon all my deleting here. I don't want to screw up the cells. This is why I'm doing it the way I am right now. Okay, same thing here. I'll do it real slow this time. So you do equals, and in this case we're doing share of voice here. So your canon here, so that's B2. So this is your top number within magazine. And in this case, I'm looking at the overall here in terms of the total. Divide that and then times 100. I'm pressing the right key here. And we get 54. Let's make sure that's correct. Yep, 54.6. Yep, they rounded down in this case, but we're basically on the right path. And then again, I mean, I'm not kidding. This is just the easiest way to do this. It will make your life so much simpler and take up less of your time. You're probably, if you did these all by hand, you'd probably hate me right now. But I'd recommend, if you're using this for your plans book and you have a share of voice and media mix that you're working with, use this, because this will help you. And again, let's do the same thing that we did with totals over here. See if this worked. Oops. There we go, 100. And let's make sure that is all the way across the board. Yep. So I did all my math correctly. It's kind of, you know, and you can make sure you can round this if you want. I'm not going to get into that because I know I'm already running out of time. So this was your legwork for the most part. Now it's just for data interpretation. So now we're looking here in terms of 7, and they say media mix reveals that a percentage, the total budget, each brand allocates at a medium, and we're looking at share of voice here. So in this case, we're talking about Xerox. And so where does Xerox spend a lot of their money? Well, we can notice this right here, 52% and 44% within national newspaper and net TV. So they're investing a lot of their budget in terms of these particular areas here. But they ask in 7B, and this is really important, is what's significance about Xerox's share of voice in these two media? So we've got it here in terms of how much they're spending. So 52% and let's say 45% in news and net TV. Go down to share of voice, and let's look at where their share of voice is. 28%, 31% with an outdoor magazine. That's interesting. Whereas in this case, we're looking at only 15% and 4%. So basically what we're saying, and this gets into question C in this particular area within 7, is based on this SOV scenario, what's Xerox's best move? As a media director, I'm not happy with this because it's basically saying that we're spending a lot of money in a place that we shouldn't be spending a lot of money because we don't have a significant share of voice. You know, in this particular case, Sharp has this incredible component of the media here within Spot TV at 74%. In this case, newspapers, Rico, I know you're going to blast me for mispronouncing this. We're looking at 24 and 35% within Canon and Rico or not Rico, Rico, whatever. So you know what I'm saying here. So again, we're fourth in this case. So I'm not going to say fire the person that's in your media mix here. But there's not a whole lot going on here. And so it may be that they want to change strategy in terms of timing. Basically, when other companies are dormant, which may be a little bit difficult for Sharp's case with, I think it was Spot TV? Let me verify that. Network TV. So Sharp had this really large contingency of spending in Network TV. Let me verify that again. Network TV. Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at Spot TV. I'm supposed to be looking at Network TV. It's still low. But 26 and 36% for Sharp and Canon. So I wasn't terribly wrong with Sharp. Just, again, a little bit different in this case. So you might want to say, and this is especially in this case now, is that we may want to look more in terms of where their scheduling is dormant. So this is where budget and scheduling start to meet a little bit here. Okay, so that's question 7. Question 8 looks at which brand has the highest share of voice in network TV and lowest share in network TV. And so this is pretty easy. So network TV, notice Canon at 36. Oh, am I looking at that wrong again? Or am I in the wrong place? Maybe I just wrote that down incorrectly. No, I wrote it down incorrectly in my own book. Whoops. 36.5 for Canon, Xerox with the lowest at 4.1. And then they mentioned highest share of voice in magazines. And again, it's written right here. But let's just go to our data sheet just for fun. In terms of Canon again, highest share versus lowest share with Xerox. So the 10th question here is, again, one of these how would you do it yourself kind of deals here. And assuming you are a marketing director representing a totally new brand in the machine or copy machine category with a $6 million budget, do you see any opportunities for unexploited media? And in this case, we're looking at some areas for that really aren't being used all that much. So we can look at question number 9. Get to it. There we go. Is to say that we're not looking at a lot of information within radio, within outdoor, and within Spot TV. There's just not very high percentage of Spot TV might have the majority. So you might want to say these are your 3 biggest areas for spending if you're a new company, because they're just not utilized that much. So to plan our own strategy, where would I spend the most? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and show you what Media Flight Plan says. So they mentioned that they're not all inclusive, so there is no real right or wrong answer. So they mentioned magazines in terms of most big business executives subscribe to business trades pubs in terms of high involvement decision. Newspapers might be good. Radio. The biggest thing that I want to mention with this is that every single one of these problems should talk about if well crafted and highly creative. This is where your media planners and your creative strategists need to work together in this case, because I can see, for example, outdoor being a great thing for photocopying, and I could see some really cool potential for that. However, the big thing would be how you would create those advertisements in and of itself. So, again, I'm not grading for accuracy on this one in particular, or for the most part, I'm just looking to see if you did it and gave it a really good effort in terms of showing your work and so forth. But that's the homework for today. Like I said, if you have any questions, please remember to do. I think it's 12 and 13 again. I've already lost my train of thought in that one. So, exercise 12 and 13. So 12 is going to be your kind of monster in this case. There's got a lot of stuff to do there, and then 13 is just that interpretation of your of 12. So good luck, and I plan on talking with y'all here very soon. So email me if you have any questions, and again, I'll be in Dallas. So if I'm not answering right away, please forgive me, but I will do my best. So I hope you all have a great day, great week, and hope to talk to you soon. All right, bye.